it was easier for them to get fish closer to the shore. The fish is now moving further away, which means that the fisherman or fisherwoman needs to put in more resources, especially in terms of fuel, in order to now get a catch that they can use to sustain their families and their livelihoods. And so the measures put in place to mitigate, to adapt, and to build resilience as it relates to climate change in the fisheries sector is very important for the mere survival of that sector, Madam President. Madam President, a few years, and even just recently as this year, I would have been privy to take part in discussions and workshops and perhaps discussions where there are consultants and so on to look at projects geared towards resilience, building mitigation and adaptation for climate change in the fisheries sector. And so, for me, this bill is very timely and very important. Perhaps a bit, well, I shouldn't say timely because I think we're a bit behind time as it relates to putting together a comprehensive bill, a comprehensive act that will actually look at the different activities, the different programs and projects that lend itself to climate change resilience and climate change mitigation, so that we can bring all of it together to ensure a more holistic approach to climate change. What I have found, Madam President, is as I sit at workshops and seminars and so on, there seems to be a lot of fragmentation as it relates to the efforts geared towards climate change. And so I think what this bill before us actually would do in the way it's set up is to bring the parties together, those of course who climate change will affect directly and those who have a stake, and those who can contribute to the discussion and the solutions, Madam President, to bring the ideas and the solutions together. Because like I indicated, I have found that a lot of the policies and a lot of the programs that exist are quite fragmented. Not too long ago, I sat in discussion with a program funded by the FAO, which is a Fisheries SASAP Readiness Project. And even whilst we were discussing this project, Madam President, there was another project that I sat in a discussion on, can't remember the name now, and then so often I had to interject and say, but we're doing this under the other project. But we're looking at this under the other project. And so the question has always been, where is the nexus formed where all of these can come together to ensure that we actually maximize, especially the climate change funding that comes to the country, so that we can prioritize what the areas are and we can use the funding to ensure that we get something more for the country, rather than many projects doing the same thing, Madam President. And so, like I said, I think this brings everything very nicely together. Madam President, if we look at section 10 of the bill that looks at the function of the committee, and when I say the committee, we're looking at one, the designation of a national designated authority. And it's something that always comes up in the discussions. And under the SASAP project, we had a questionnaire that we were supposed to fill from the FAO, and there was a question about the existence of a national designated authority on climate change. And of course we had a back and forth as to what exists and whether what exists, the semblance of what exists actually meets the needs and so on. And of course we know that that too, Madam President, has negative implications for even the receipt of climate change funding and into the country. And so when we look at that, is why in particular I like some of the sections there. When we look at section 10, which looks at the functions of the committee, and in A it says to guide the development of a cross-sectoral policies, laws, strategies and action plans for 1, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and 2, building resilience to climate change impacts and loss and damage from climate change. And like I said, I particularly like this clause because I think that is so important, Madam President. And of course, coming out of a more holistic approach it means that, like I said, the industry in which I operate, which is the fisheries industry, of course, we are get to benefit from that type of discussion, that type of moving away from the fragmented approach, because you know, as you go along, you see little things happen within the fisheries sector. And I need to applaud the government for some of the actions that they've taken to help the fishers mitigate and manage climate change, such as the introduction of additional fish aggregating devices. I know last year into this year, we have a few that has not deployed, but across the island, we've seen a greater thrust by this government to ensure that fish aggregating devices, what is known as FADs, are deployed around the island to help the fishers reduce the costs that they have to face due to the issues of climate change, and I'm grateful for that, Madam President. What we've also seen in the fisheries industry is higher records of distresses. So, for example, we're having more incidents of fishers who are stranded at sea, fishers who are having problems with mechanical problems and so on. We're getting so many more of these incidents, and we know some of it is related to the additional pressure placed on them because of climate change. I did say very short, Madam President, and so I just as I'm winding down, I want to also look at the aspect that speaks to the purpose of the Act, which sort of summarizes all of what is within the Act. So if we go to page 10, Madam President, it tells us that the purpose of the Act, and I just want to touch a few, to recognize the challenges that climate change poses to the population, natural resources and economy, and the urgency of climate change action that is needed. And of course, I need not go in detail into these because the speakers before me have looked at in depth, in my opinion, what the challenges are and what the consequences are in terms of climate change, and of course all of the spin-offs from that. Also, C speaks to developing a comprehensive approach to climate change in addressing mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. And in terms of loss and damage, like I indicated, Madam President, we're seeing the effects not just on the physical infrastructure, as Senator Jean pointed out, and as well as Senator Pauline Antoine, but also the other resources, like I said, such as fishing vessels and the degradation of the fishing pots and so on. I know during sometime last year, during one of the adverse weather conditions, we had much more reports of loss of fish pots, for example, Madam President. And the question that we could not really give a succinct answer to the fishers was what happens in these circumstances. A lot of them had reports of loss of fishing pots, and when we look at the cost associated with building a fish pot, a roll of fish pot wire 4 feet 5 feet is about almost $900 now. So imagine having put in that type of resources just for the wire mesh alone, and there are other little items that come into building a fish pot, and just in a few hours it is gone. And most fishers who do deploy pots, they deploy 5 and 10 and 15, 20 pots, and all of that is gone because of an adverse weather condition. And the question is, what is the compensation that is available to us, already given that they cannot insure the pots? So there is no means of them insuring the pots, but they have made an investment, Madam President. And so I think the fishers will be quite elated to know that the government has now put a bill before us that is to become an act that will look at all of these little aspects that will inevitably help them in building and growing the industry, as every loss, Madam President, puts them back a few. So I just wanted to, like I said, make some of these observations specifically on behalf of the fishing sector, Madam President, and to lend my unwavering support to the bill before us as we seek to deal with the adverse effects of climate change, a phenomena we know that we have to deal with whether we like it or not. I thank you, Madam President. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Madam President. Just some very short observations, or I guess again questions as relates to the bill. I'm not going to repeat the I think what has been said before as to regards the reality of climate change. We all live in a small, vulnerable country, and I think we, on a daily basis, experience the very, very real impact of climate change. But my concern with regard to the bill, in reading through it, is that in some ways it seems to be a plan to plan. I accept, obviously, that there does need to be research, there does need to be, as my colleague Senator Shalry pointed out, I'm grateful for her intervention in that regard, that there needs to be unity in the approach of the various disparate organizations that are involved, and so there needs to be some central coordination of their activities, and I understand that as part of the bill. But again, listening to Senator Jean, she sort of reinforced the point that came to me when I was reading through the bill, that to actually have any concrete impact on climate change, you have to go a lot further than this bill currently provides for. There actually has to be, and we're going to be, I'm sure, coming back, well, I don't know how long I'll be in this chamber, but the government, whichever government forms the government, will have to come back on several occasions to actual legislation to carry out the steps necessary to combat climate change. So from a policy point of view, I understand why this is being done, but like I said, it seems to be a plan to plan, and there's a lot more work that is going to have to be done before we can actually have any genuine impact on climate change. Listening to Senator Shalry again, and she made the point about the impact that climate change is having on her fishing industry. And it sort of struck me, and it's a question I've had for some time now, what steps are actually being taken to reorganize the industry? I think we've recognized for a number of years now that the movement or the migration of our fish is away from St. Lucia, or away from our coast, I should say, sorry. Yet still we keep investing in small open pirogues that are ill-suited for perhaps the distances that persons have to travel to actually get the fish that we need to land. So what steps are actually being taken to accelerate the change in the industry that is necessary, one, for the industry to survive, and two, for it to become more sustainable and more profitable as a whole? And that's just sort of one of the questions I have. How does this bill assist with that, other than, again, planning to plan? Where are the actual concrete steps that are being taken to accelerate that development in just that one industry, for example? But again, with plastics, with energy, with all these other areas, what are the concrete steps that are being taken to achieve the changes in practice, the changes in the industries, the various industries that we need to address the negative impacts of climate change? I note that I think we are incorporating the Kyoto Agreement, we're incorporating the Paris Agreement, and I believe the UN Convention on Climate Change. And part of that, for example, is setting of greenhouse gas emissions limits and restrictions. But the question that sort of came to me again is, what happens if we don't meet them? If we set the standards and we don't achieve it, what is the penalty that will be or befall us as a result, other than obviously the continuing degradation of our environment? But that being said, and I think has been said by speakers before me, our impact on the environment, the global environment, is minuscule. So again, what is the real benefit of this piece of legislation? Again, I'm happy that the conversation has begun. I'm happy that the government at least is signaling that this is a serious issue. But again, I don't think that anybody is debating that, at least not in St. Lucia, as far as I'm aware. So I would have preferred to have more concrete legislation being brought, where we're actually targeting and tackling the actual impacts, as opposed to, again, planning to plan. That is just my observation with regard to the piece of legislation, and I hope that we'll be back here again with the more concrete results to enact the changes, that we need to improve our environmental conditions. Thank you, Madam.
Senator Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President. My intervention is specific to a response that I wanted to offer with regard to a point that was raised by the independent senator. I think I share similar sentiments as far as what climate change does to us. As we know, we emit less than 1% of carbon emissions, yet we pay a heavy price. But I think an issue was raised, very, very pertinent, as to how the bill really addresses what Senator Shalry raised, and that I think is a very legitimate question. I would have asked the same. I just had a brief exchange with my colleague, parliamentary secretary, who presented the bill. And one of the things we would note is that in one of the sections of the bill, I was trying to find the relevant section, but I took note when the presentation was made by the Honorable Minister in the other chamber, that the bill establishes rules for climate change management facilities to access finance. And that would tell me, therefore, that that bill would speak to the idea of cooperatives. And I think Senator Shalry manages or is part of such an organization, if I'm correct. And if there is something like a fisheries cooperative, as we have in this country, I am seeing that this bill if it is making available rules to be able to get the management facilities, in that case the fisheries co-op, is it? The Southern Fishermen's Co-op, to be able to access finance, and we know the amount of money that's available out there. It would then provide, if the fishermen are cooperativized or any of the stakeholders come together and organize themselves, that they can therefore access money or finance for them to be able to access one of the things that was raised, which was insurance. I think Senator Shalry mentioned that the fishers did not have insurance for their pots. And so other sectors, the agriculture sector, we have issues of crop insurance, when 75% of the banana industry was blown off with one tropical storm. I think that, to give credit to the bill, Madam President, I think that particular clause, where it establishes rules for climate change management, and where it allows for access to finance, can be an indication that that issue, that concern, can be addressed. And I'm hoping that that is explored, so that finance can be accessed once you can organize those people to be able to get support for stuff, for activities or interventions like group insurance. I thank you, Madam President.
Honorable Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Education, Sustainable Development, Innovation, Science and Technology and Vocational Training.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I wish to thank the senators here who have made an intervention regarding this bill. I am happy that we all agree that climate change is real, and we must play our part in reducing carbon emissions. I am encouraged by the firm conviction that especially Senator Jha has given about climate change. We must appreciate that the world has been making strides in reducing fossil fuels, but at this point, it's only about a quarter of the world energy is derived from renewable sources. And so there is a lot of more work, in fact, a lot of work to be done if we are serious about reducing climate change. It is probably time to return our focus to the more renewable resources. In St. Lucia, we have tried to explore energy from Sulphur Springs for a long time, what's it again? Geothermal energy, sorry. But we are still hearing they are going to drill here and drill there, so we are waiting to see whether St. Lucia would be able to make strides with geothermal energy. One senator spoke about plastics and the need probably to ban single plastics on the island. In addition to, well, it is still a product of fossil fuels, and we need to get rid of those in our country. Maybe Senator did not speak about the effects on fish life, that the plastics, the impact of the plastics on fish life. I have attended a few workshops, and I am pretty much aware that they have adverse effects on the fish. The bigger fish swallow the plastics and it suffocates them, etc. So there is a need for greater monitoring of what reaches our borders and what is allowed to enter our country. I know that we have policy on single plastics in St. Lucia, but as Senator Jha was saying, we still see the plastics, we still drink water from the plastic bottles and the soft drinks, etc. And we have to dispose. We do not have any recycling. I don't know if you know of any in St. Lucia where we can dispose of those plastics. And so when there is heavy rains, we can see the evidence of the plastic in the Castries Harbor, on the sides of the road and everywhere in St. Lucia. So there is indeed a need to address the situation with the plastics on our island. Senator also spoke about building resilient infrastructure. And when we look around and we look at the houses that people build, we know that if there is strong wind, that the roofs start to fly away. And so these are not climate resilient. And so even if we have to spend more money to build a bridge or to build a building, it will be cheaper if we spend the money instead of having to replace a building every time it is damaged. And we know that we do not have the resources to do that. So it might be more prudent if we are able to invest and invest well in climate resilient infrastructure. You spoke now about the commitment by the regional and global organizations. We know sometimes pledges are made and we don't see the monies. But we are hopeful that the monies will circulate among the small territories so that we can limit our loss and damage. Senator Shalwi spoke about the difficulty of fishermen to find fish. And we know it is because of global warming. The shores are getting warmer, and so the fish are venturing further to be more comfortable in deeper waters. And so it becomes more expensive to catch fish, and probably that's why we have to pay a pound of fish for $14 and $16. Sometimes I tell myself I would never go fishing, so I'll pay whatever price that a fisherman asks. But not everybody may be able to buy the fish at those costs. So we have to limit on our fossil fuels. We have to mitigate climate change in order that the marine life is more comfortable and we are able to enjoy the volume of fish that we had known, and the fishermen can enjoy greater benefits from fishing. Madam President, we also spoke about the fragmentation in the efforts towards combating climate change. And I think this is why this bill has come into effect. we get assistance from organizations, from donors overseas, and sometimes the money is being used for the same thing in so many different sectors, instead of having a coordinated effort so that we can make maximum use of the assistance that we get. So I am hopeful that this bill will bring the bits together for a more holistic and more deliberate approach to use the resources effectively to mitigate climate change. Senator Shalwe also spoke about the aggregating devices that are deployed for cost reduction. And as we have always said, this government is there for the people, and therefore we are trying to assist the fishermen at this time so that at least they can get a livelihood from fishing, which is getting more difficult. I agree that fishers must invest, but cannot insure their fish pots. They invest, but they cannot insure their fish pots. And this is why some of the fishermen find it difficult to continue with their trade, because after a storm, when they lose their fish pots, some of them lose their vessels, it is difficult to bounce back. And we are hoping that the Loss and Damage Fund will assist those fishermen. But it is also true, as Senator Lee said, that the vessels we have are not climate resilient. And so there might be, we should try to ensure that we assist, especially as Senator Gibeon was saying, getting into cooperatives. And we should know that international organizations don't always entertain individuals, but they assist groups. And so it is easier for a cooperative to get funding than for an individual fisherman. And in St. Lucia, we know some of the fishermen, it's, as we call it, cutthroat. They want to do things on their own. Some of them don't want to be part of any organization. They go to fish and get, but it's when there is adversity that they call foul. And so we must work with our fishermen, we must work with our farmers, that they come together within organizations so that they can better assist one another. Madam President, I think I have encapsulated most of what the members have said. I don't know if there is anything else, but let me thank everyone again for their contribution. And okay, let me thank all the senators for their contribution, and let us see the bill to its final stages.
Senators, the question is that the climate change bill be read a second time. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
An act to implement the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the Paris Agreement, and the Kyoto Protocol to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to provide for the functions of the department responsible for climate change matters, to establish an electronic climate change database and the Climate Change Committee, to set the parameters for the development of a climate change adaptation policy, the National Adaptation Plan, the nationally determined contribution, and to account for greenhouse gas emissions and for related matters.
Clause 2.
Interpretation.
Clause 2 stands part of the bill. Clause 3.
Force of law.
Clause 3 stands part of the bill. Clause 4.
Purposes of this act.
Clause 4 stands part of the bill. Clause 5.
Act binds the crown.
Clause 5 stands part of the bill. Part 1, clauses 6 to 17.
Administration.
Part 1, clauses 6 to 17 stands part of the bill. Part 2, clauses 18 to 20.
Climate change, adaptation policy, and national adaptation plan.
Before we proceed, I think, Leader, Honorable Member, that there was a change on page 19 of the original. Page 19, part 2, clause 18, section 1.
Clause 18.1, climate change adaptation policy. A line, last line, replace 10 years with 5 years.
Okay, senators, are you on the same page with us? Are you all there? All? And the second one, clause 19.1.
Clause 19.1, national adaptation plan. Second line, replace 10 years with 5 years.
Yeah. Are we all there, senators? Okay. So,
Part 3,
oh, hold on. So part 2, clauses 18 to 20 stands part of the bill.
aye.
Part 3, clauses 21 to 22.
Greenhouse emission.
Now we have a change.
Page 22, clause 22.1, greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. First line, delete the second the before the word committee. Delete the second the, THE, before the word committee.
Are we on there, senators? Okay. So part 3, clauses 21 to 22 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 4, clause 23.
Nationally determined contribution.
Part 4, clause 23 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Part 5, clause 24 to 27.
Miscellaneous.
Part 5, clause 24 to 27 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule 1.
Climate priority sectors.
Schedule 1 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule 2.
Kyoto Protocol to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Schedule 2 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule 3.
Paris Agreement.
Schedule 3 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule 4.
United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change.
Schedule 4 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Schedule 5.
List of agencies represented on the committee.
Schedule 5 stands part of the bill.
Aye.
Clause 1.
Short title and commencement.
Clause 1 stands part of the bill. Senators, the question is that the committee rises and the bill be reported. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. As many as of the contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Senators, I beg to report that the climate change bill went through committee stage. Well, the amendments were made in the House without amendments. Honorable Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Education.
Madam President, I move that the report of the committee be adopted and the bill be read a third time and passed.
Senators, the question is that the report of the committee be adopted and the climate change bill be read the third time and passed. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Be it enacted by the King's Most Excellent Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the House of Assembly and the Senate of St. Lucia, and by the authority of the same as follows. This act may be cited as the Climate Change Act 2024.
Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do stand adjourned, Sine D.
Senators, the question is that the Senate do stand adjourned sine die. I now put the question. As many as of that opinion say aye. Aye. As many as of a contrary opinion say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Just come to the end of today's sitting of the St. Lucia Senate, and a moment ago the climate change bill was passed. This bill sought to address issues of climate change and how to mitigate the impact of climate change on the island. It was also pointed out that the bill was almost a condition by international lending agencies to secure financing on various projects. And so this bill was presented by the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Honorable Pauline Antoine and Prosper, and she highlighted the importance of such a bill for small island nations like ours. Earlier, the House went into a short recession, and prior to that there was a very heated debate on the Tourism Development Bill. This is a bill, according to the Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Honorable Gideon Ferdinand, when he made his presentation, said that it was intended to redefine or restructure the tourism industry. It was an inclusive and equitable bill which seeks to give members or St. Lucians to make them just not merely observers in the tourism industry, but also to make them participants and owners. A key element of that bill was even the redefinition of the term hotel to mean a property with less than 6 rooms. And in that case, it really opened up the industry, if you will, to anyone with a property of 2 rooms. And this bill, like the minister and other members who supported it, said it is also intended to give incentives to those people, to people who want to explore, people who want to invest, and become partakers in the tourism industry. This generated a lot of debate, and especially from the leader of opposition business. Honorable Dominic Fede, he said the bill was nothing new and that St. Lucians were already owners of the industry. Michael, want to take it from here?
Oui, ça, nous, là, c'est un finissement de session. Ce sénateur a discuté, a bien parlé à cette présentation, il y a un bill et une loi qui a baillé Saint-Lucie plus droit avec plus habilité pour faire des affaires qui concernent le changement climatique. Avec ça fait particulièrement puisqu'il y a chaque pays, particulièrement les Nations Unies avec ces pays comme ça, qui conduisent à faire changement climatique d'Europe et en Saint-Lucie. Pour aider Saint-Lucie faire développer policy, pour joindre l'argent pour faire différents bagages qui concernent le changement climatique. Et tout le temps, il n'y a pas passé de loi ça là. Saint-Lucie par ça jeune qualité c'est bénéfice là après il était nécessaire avec quand nous étions dans la discussion débat Saint-Lucie j'ai souffert un peu et puis pont qui croisé nous quand changer de temps week-end Thomas avec plusieurs différents dangers récemment l'année passée nous tenions en novembre nous tenions dans novembre 6 c'est le 6 novembre en petit moment la pluie avec quantité de dommages qui étaient faits en notre pays. Alors, il était important pour nous passer là. Avec avant ça, nous avons un débat qui était chaud tout bonnement à ce des façades, c'est la présentation par façade gouvernement, ça c'est honorable Goubian Ferdinand qui chef façade gouvernement. Avec façade opposition, on est là-bas, ça c'est sénateur Dominique Fédé répondre comme ça, lui-même c'était ministre touriste en temps passé aussi, avec aussi il travaille en l'industrie touriste à Pointe-Chait. Alors il tenait un chai bagaille pour dire à sous ça avec la tenue, vous savez quand il va dire aller casser, il parlait tellement il parlait tellement mauvais, mais ça qui était intéressant, c'est pour finir le débat, après le sénateur Dominique Fédé parler, speaker a regardé pour si l'autre monde qui a parlé, personne n'a pas parlé, avec écuyer à sous mon qui présentait une motion de bill là pour fermer. Avec un cas ça, c'était écuyer à sous sénateur Goubian Ferdinand pour fermer, puisque personne n'a montré comme que il ni l'intérêt pour parler, puisque man yo ka montré l'intérêt pour parler en cas consiste là, c'est pour mettre micro mettez on, ça veut dire un petit lumière qu'à faire si c'est speaker et bien si c'est président savent qui ou intéressé, personne pas montrer ou intéressé. Alors madame président qui est à ce sénateur Ferdinand avec la même l'autre sénateur, ça c'est sénateur Ferropolius, mettez la clé on pour monsieur, mais speaker président d'accord, il déjà regardé tous les deux façades là, il paraît personne pour ni l'intérêt avec écrit à ce sénateur Ferdinand pour fermer le débat là avec un sénateur Dominique Fédé et c'est du bout pour demander pour quitter le sénateur faire parler, mais le président n'a pas accepté sa pièce. Mais il y a pas que même qu'on quitte fait un cas conseil semaine passée, c'est le même bagarre là qui fait encore, mais comme nous dit, madame président n'a pas accepté, avec il quitte speaker, ça c'est sénateur Ferdinand Fermé. Mais il est capable qui mais il a quitté la discussion aller mais avec après ça 10 minutes après nous toutes ces façades opposition il marché de moins pas savoir si c'est pour ça mais nous savons qu'il n'y a pas de présent pièce pour discussion à ce changement climat.
Yes, and yes, we saw, as you said, it was a walkout. We're not sure, but they weren't present in the House to debate the climate change bill. And as you mentioned, Michael, the president kept to the standing orders even when the leader of opposition business was insisting that the member Farah Polius make her contribution. And you know, the president reminded members of the standing orders, saying everyone knows the protocol and the procedure when one needs to make a contribution. You know, the senators are not new, and so she said she had made her ruling that the leader of government business that she had called upon would end the debate on that particular bill, and so it went. But earlier there was a motion to exempt tax on certain sporting equipment, particularly lights and lighting infrastructure by the St. Lucia Football Association, and other goods and equipment for various sporting disciplines. So in effect, this was what was presented here today at today's sitting.
Eh bien, merci un peu, Virgile. Nous avons dit merci un peu pour rester puis nous. Nous bien contents de rester puis nous pour garder temps exactement qui ça a passé. Comme c'est plaisir nous pour présenter au public là avec généralement tout le monde qui a regardé. Les salons nous avons dit merci pour les techniciens et tous ces travailleurs, peut-être pas qu'à mais nous qui a aidé mener présentation ça là. Merci avec nous car vous maintenant en studio nous MTN.